colleagues to support it. I yield the floor and suggest an absence of the quorum.
The senator is correct. The clerk will read the call. Will read the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Mr. President.
The senator from New Hampshire.
Mr. President, I ask that the quorum call be lifted.
Without objection, so ordered. The senator from New Hampshire is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm pleased to be here to join my colleague, Senator Gillibrand, in expressing my concern about how we address sexual assault in the military. For the past several years, we have all become increasingly aware of the prevalence of sexual assault in our military. Personally, I know I share the outrage of all Americans that one of our nation's proudest institutions is afflicted by this level of criminal violence. In 1989, Secretary of the Navy H. Lawrence Garrett III established a policy of zero tolerance for sexual harassment and sexual assault. 2 years later, the tailhook scandal happened at a convention attended by the Secretary and the Chief of Naval Operations. On June 2, 1992, Secretary Garrett wrote a memo to his military leaders that said, and I quote, "While each individual must be accountable for his or her own actions, commanding officers have a unique responsibility for leadership in ensuring appropriate behavior and attitudes of those under their command," end quote. In the end, the tailhook scandal resulted in 90 victims, 83 women and 7 men, 140 officers facing possible punishment, and 0 criminal prosecutions for incidents of assault. All of these events occurred under the same zero-tolerance policy that military leaders espouse today. The tailhook scandal was only the beginning of our awareness of the silent crisis within the military. Since that time, there have been numerous scandals in every service. Yet, 20 years later, we're not only told that the system works, but that the status quo, maintaining the chain of command on this issue, is vital to solving the problem. This, of course, ignores the reality of the sexual assault crisis. In fact, according to the Department of Defense Sexual Assault Prevention and Response Office, 26,000 of the cases of unwanted sexual contact and sexual assault occurred in 2012, and that was an increase of 37% since 2010. Clearly, something must change, and it must change now. Thanks to the hard work of Senators Gillibrand, Boxer, Blumenthal, and Hirono, along with so many supporters on both sides of the aisle, this issue is back at the forefront of our national debate. And we now have an historic opportunity not only to make additional meaningful common-sense reforms to our military criminal justice system, and I think that the defense authorization bill that we are going to take up before the end of this year, hopefully, has a number of very critical proposals to address sexual assault in our military, and I certainly support those. And I was pleased that those provisions got unanimous support within the committee. But I don't think we went far enough in that bill. We also need to send a powerful message to the tens of thousands of victims, many of whom have been suffering quietly for decades, that what happened to them in our military is unacceptable. In too many of those cases, it's criminal, and it will no longer be tolerated. The Military Justice Improvement Act of 2013 addresses what victims tell us is the #1 problem in the current system. Victims decide not to report sexual assault because they fear their commanding officers will not take the issue seriously and they will be retaliated against or nothing will be done. According to the Department of Defense Sexual Assault Prevention and Response Office, 50% of female victims stated they did not report the crime because they believed nothing would be done with their report. And 25% of women and 27% of men who received unwanted sexual contact indicated that the offender was actually someone in their own military chain of command. Our legislation addresses the chain of command issue. It removes the decision of whether to go to trial from the chain of command and puts it into the hands of experienced prosecutors. This is a straightforward change. It's designed to promote transparency and accountability in the prosecution of these crimes. It would also ensure that impartial individuals specifically trained to handle these cases determine whether they move forward, which permanently eliminates the conflicts of interest that exist in the current system. We need all victims to know that if they come forward, their cases will be handled fairly and impartially. Several days ago, in America, we celebrated Veterans Day. Many of us went home to our home states to honor the men and women who throughout our history have served in our military. Our military's traditions of honor and respect are too important to continue to be plagued by the issue of sexual assault. That's why I urge my colleagues to support the Military Justice Improvement Act, because we strengthen our military when victims of sexual assault have the confidence to come forward and report crimes, and when we remove fear and stigma from the process. We strengthen our military when we create a process to deliver fair and impartial justice on behalf of the victims of these crimes. Every man and woman who wears the uniform deserves these rights. And after more than 20 years of waiting, it is way past time we come through for them. Thank you very much, Mr. President. I yield the floor and note the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
We've now heard from Senator Gillibrand, along with Senators Hirono and Shaheen, talking about an amendment that Senator Gillibrand plans to offer to the Defense Programs Bill next week. It would remove the prosecution of sexual assault cases from the military chain of command. Right now we're going to pick up President Obama's remarks from the White House today, where he announces a change that would allow insurance companies the option to keep offering consumers plans that would have otherwise been canceled.
That has received a lot of attention concerns Americans who've received letters from their insurers that they may be losing the plans they bought in the old individual market, often because they no longer meet the law's requirements to cover basic benefits like prescription drugs or doctor's visits. Now, as I indicated earlier, I completely get how upsetting this can be for a lot of Americans, particularly after assurances they heard from me that if they had a plan that they liked, they could keep it. And to those Americans, I hear you loud and clear. I said that I would do everything we can to fix this problem, and today I'm offering an idea that will help do it. Already, people who have plans that predate the Affordable Care Act can keep those plans if they haven't changed. That was already in the law. That's what's called a grandfather clause. It was included in the law. Today, we're going to extend that principle both to people whose plans have changed since the law took effect and to people who bought plans since the law took effect. So state insurance commissioners still have the power to decide what plans can and can't be sold in their states, but the bottom line is insurers can extend current plans that would otherwise be canceled into 2014, and Americans whose plans have been canceled can choose to re-enroll in the same kind of plan. We're also requiring insurers to extend current plans to inform their customers about two things. One, that what protections these renewed plans don't include. Number two, that the marketplace offers new options with better coverage and tax credits that might help you bring down the costs. So, if you received one of these letters, I'd encourage you to take a look at the marketplace. Even if the website isn't working as smoothly as it should be for everybody yet, the plan comparison tool that lets you browse costs for new plans near you is working just fine. Now, this fix won't solve every problem for every person, but it's going to help a lot of people. Doing more will require work with Congress. And I've said from the beginning, I'm willing to work with Democrats and Republicans to fix problems as they arise. This is an example of what I was talking about. We can always make this law work better. It is important to understand, though, that the old individual market was not working well. And it's important that we don't pretend that somehow that's a place worth going back to. Too often it works fine as long as you stay healthy. It doesn't work well when you're sick. So year after year, Americans were routinely exposed to financial ruin or denied coverage due to minor pre-existing conditions or dropped from coverage altogether, even if they paid their premiums on time. That's one of the reasons we pursued this reform in the first place. And that's why I will not accept proposals that are just another brazen attempt to undermine or repeal the overall law and drag us back into a broken system. We will continue to make the case, even to folks who choose to keep their own plans, that they should shop around in the new marketplace, because there's a good chance that they'll be able to buy better insurance at lower cost. So, we're going to do everything we can to help the Americans who've received these cancellation notices. But I also want everybody to remember there are still 40 million Americans who don't have health insurance at all. I'm not going to walk away from 40 million people who have the chance to get health insurance for the first time, and I'm not going to walk away from something that has helped the cost of health care grow at its slowest rate in 50 years. So we're at the opening weeks of the project to build a better health care system for everybody, a system that will offer real financial security and peace of mind to millions of Americans. It is a complex process. There are all kinds of challenges. I'm sure there will be additional challenges that come up. And it's important that we're honest and straightforward in terms when we come up with a problem with these reforms and these laws, that we address them. But we've got to move forward on this. It took 100 years for us to even get to the point where we could start talking about and implementing a law to make sure everybody's got health insurance. And my pledge to the American people is that we're going to solve the problems that are there. We're going to get it right. And the Affordable Care Act is going to work for the American people. So with that, I'm going to take your questions, and I'm going to start with Julie Pace of AP.
Thank you, Mr. President. The combination of the website problems and the concerns over the policy cancellations has sparked a lot of worry within your own party. And polls also show that you're taking some hits with the public on both your overall job approval rating and also on factors like trust and honesty.
Right.
Do you feel as though the flawed healthcare rollout has led to a breach in the public trust and confidence in government? And if so, how do you plan to resolve that?
There is no doubt that people are frustrated. We just came out of a shutdown, and the possibility that for the first time in over 200 years we wouldn't pay our bills. And people breathed a sigh of relief when that finally got done, and the next thing they know is that the President's health care reform can't get the website to work, and that there's these other problems with respect to cancellation notices. And I understand why folks are frustrated. I would be too, because sometimes people look at what's taking place in Washington and they say not enough is getting done that helps me with my life. And regardless of what Congress does, ultimately I'm the President of the United States, and they expect me to do something about it. So in terms of how I intend to approach it, I'm just going to keep on working as hard as I can around the priorities that the American people care about. And I think it's legitimate for them to expect me to have to win back some credibility on this health care law in particular, and on a whole range of these issues in general. And that's on me. I mean, we fumbled the rollout on this health care law. There are a whole bunch of things about it that are working really well, which people didn't notice, right? Because they weren't controversial. So making sure kids could stay on their parents' plans till they were up through the age of 25, and making sure that seniors got more discounts on their prescription drugs. There were a whole bunch of stuff that we did well over the first 3 years, but we always knew that these marketplaces, creating a place where people can shop and through competition get a better deal for the health insurance that their families need, we always knew that that was going to be complicated and everybody was going to be paying a lot of attention to it. And we should have done a better job getting that right on day one, not on day 28 or on day 40. I am confident that by the time we look back on this next year, that people are going to say, this is working well, and it's helping a lot of people. But my intention in terms of winning back the confidence of the American people is just to work as hard as I can, identify the problems that we've got, make sure that we're fixing them, whether it's a website, whether it is making sure that folks who've got these cancellation notices get help. We're just going to keep on chipping away at this until the job is done. Major Garrett.
Thank you, Mr. President. You said while the law was being debated, if you like your plan, you can keep it. You said after the law was implemented or signed, if you like your plan, you can keep it. Americans believed you, sir, when you said that to them over and over. Do you not believe, sir, the American people deserve a deeper, more transparent accountability from you as to why you said that over and over when your own statistics published in the Federal Register alerted your policy staff, and I presume you, the fact that millions of Americans would, in fact, probably fall into the very gap you're trying to administratively fix now? That's one question. Second question. you were informed, or several people in this building were informed, 2 weeks before the launch of the website that it was failing the most basic tests internally. And yet a decision was made to launch the website on October 1st. Did you, sir, make that test? And if so, did you regret that?
Okay, on the website, I was not informed directly that the website would not be working as the way it was supposed to. Had I been informed, I wouldn't be going out saying, boy, this is going to be great. You know, I'm accused of a lot of things, but I don't think I'm stupid enough to go around saying this is going to be like shopping on Amazon or Travelocity a week before the website opens if I thought that it wasn't going to work. So clearly, we and I did not have enough awareness about the problems in the website. Even a week into it, the thinking was that these were some glitches that would be fixed with patches, as opposed to some broader systemic problems that took much longer to fix, and we're still working on them. So that doesn't excuse the fact that they just don't work, but I think it's fair to say that no, Garrett Major, we would not have rolled out something knowing very well that it wasn't going to work the way it was supposed to, given all the scrutiny that we knew was going to be on the website. With respect to the pledge I made that if you like your plan, you can keep it. I think, and I've said in interviews, that there is no doubt that the way I put that forward unequivocally ended up not being accurate. It was not because of my intention not to deliver on that commitment and that promise. We put a grandfather clause into the law, but it was insufficient. Keep in mind that the individual market accounts for 5% of the population. So when I said you can keep your health care, I'm looking at folks who've got employer-based health care, I'm looking at folks who've got Medicare and Medicaid, and that accounts for the vast majority of Americans. And then for people who don't have any health insurance at all, obviously that didn't apply. My commitment to them was you're going to be able to get affordable health care for the first time. You have an individual market that accounts for about 5% of the population, and our working assumption was, my working assumption was, that the majority of those folks would find better policies at lower costs or the same costs in the marketplaces, and that the universe of folks who potentially would not find a better deal in the marketplaces, the grandfather clause would work sufficiently for them. And it didn't. And again, that's on us, which is why that's on me. And that's why I'm trying to fix it. And as I said earlier, I guess last week, and I will repeat, that's something I deeply regret because it's scary getting a cancellation notice. Now, it is important to understand that out of that population, typically, there is constant churn in that market. This market is not very stable and reliable for people. So people have a lot of complaints when they're in that marketplace. As long as you're healthy, things seem to be going pretty good. And so a lot of people think, I've got pretty good insurance, until they get sick, and then suddenly they look at the fine print and they've got a $50,000 out-of-pocket expense that they can't pay. We know that on average, over the last decade, each year, premiums in that individual market would go up an average of 15% a year. I know that because when we were talking about health care reform, one of the complaints was, I bought health care in the individual market, and I just got a notice from the insurer, they dropped me after I had an illness, or my premiums skyrocketed by 20 or 30%. Why aren't we doing something about this? So part of what our goal has been is to make sure that that individual market is stable and fair and has the kind of consumer protections that make sure that people don't get a rude surprise when they really need health insurance. But if you just got a cancellation notice, and so far you're thinking my prices are pretty good, you haven't been sick, and it fits your budget, and now you get this notice, you're going to be worried about it. And if the insurer is saying the reason you're getting this notice is because of the Affordable Care Act, then you're going to be understandably aggravated about it. Now, for a big portion of those people, the truth is they might have got a notice saying, we're jacking up your rates by 30%. They might have said, from here on out, we're not going to cover X, Y, and Z illnesses. We're changing the policy, because these were all 12-month policies. The insurance companies were under no obligation to renew the exact same policies that you had before. But look, one of the things I understood when we decided to reform the health insurance market, part of the reason why it hasn't been done before, and it's very difficult to do, is that anything that's going on that's tough in the healthcare market, if you've initiated a reform, can be attributed to your law. And so what we want to do is to be able to say to these folks, you know what, the Affordable Care Act is not going to be the reason why insurers have to cancel your plan. Now, what folks may find is the insurance companies may still come back and say, we want to charge you 20% more than we did last year, or we're not going to cover prescription drugs now. But that's in the nature of the market that existed earlier.
Did you decide, sir, that the simple declaration was something the American people could handle, but this nuanced answer you just gave now was something they couldn't handle, and you didn't trust the American people with a fuller truth?
No. I think, as I said earlier, Major, my expectation was that for 98% of the American people, either it genuinely wouldn't change at all, or they'd be pleasantly surprised with the options in the marketplace, and that the grandfather clause would cover the rest. That proved not to be the case, and that's on me. And the American people, those who got cancellation notices, do deserve and have received an apology from me, but they don't want just words. What they want is whether we can make sure that they are in a better place and that we meet that commitment. And by the way, I think it's very important for me to note that there are a whole bunch of folks up in Congress and others who made this statement, and they were entirely sincere about it. And the fact that you've got this this percentage of people who've had this impact, I want them to know that their senator or congressman, they were making representations based on what I told them and what this White House and our administrative staff told them. And so it's not on them, it's on us. But it is something that we intend to fix. Good. Steve Carlson.
Do you have reason to believe that Iran would walk away from nuclear talks if Congress draws up new sanctions? And would a diplomatic breakdown at this stage leave you no option but military action? And how do you respond to your critics on the Hill who say that it was only tough sanctions that got Iran to the table? Only tougher sanctions will make it capitulate.
Well, let me make a couple of points. Number one, I've said before and I will repeat, we do not want Iran having nuclear weapons. And it would be not only dangerous to us and our allies, but it would be destabilizing to the entire region and could trigger a nuclear arms race that would make life much more dangerous for all of us. So our policy is Iran cannot have nuclear weapons. And I'm leaving all options on the table to make sure that we meet that goal. Point number two. The reason we've got such vigorous sanctions is because I and my administration put in place when I came into office the international structure to have the most effective sanctions ever. And so I think it's fair to say that I know a little bit about sanctions since we set them up and made sure that we mobilized the entire international community so that there weren't a lot of loopholes and they really had bite. And the intention in setting up those sanctions always was to bring the Iranians to the table so that we could resolve this issue peacefully, because that is my preference. That's my preference because any armed conflict has cost to it, but it's also my preference because the best way to assure that a country does not have nuclear weapons is that they are making a decision not to have nuclear weapons, and we're in a position to verify that they don't have nuclear weapons. So as a consequence of the sanctions that we put in place, and I appreciate all the help, bipartisan help that we received from Congress in making that happen, Iran's economy has been crippled. They had a negative 5% growth rate last year. Their currency plummeted. They're having significant problems in just the day-to-day economy on the ground in Iran. And President Rouhani made a decision that he was prepared to come and have a conversation with the international community about what they could do to solve this problem with us. We've now had a series of conversations, and it has never been realistic that we would resolve the entire problem all at once. What we have done is seen the possibility of an agreement in which Iran would halt advances on its program, that it would dilute some of the highly enriched uranium that makes it easier for them to potentially produce a weapon, that they are subjecting themselves to much more vigorous inspections so that we know exactly what they're doing at all their various facilities, and that would then provide time and space for us to test over a certain period of months whether or not they are prepared to actually resolve this issue to the satisfaction of the international community, making us confident that, in fact, they're not pursuing a nuclear weapons program. In return, the basic structure of what's been talked about, although not completed, is that we would provide very modest relief at the margins of the sanctions that we've set up. But importantly, we would leave in place the core sanctions that are most effective and have most impact on the Iranian economy, specifically oil sanctions and sanctions with respect to banks and financing. And what that gives us is the opportunity to test how serious are they, but it also gives us an assurance that if it turns out 6 months from now that they're not serious, we can dial those sanctions right back up. So my message to Congress has been that let's see if this short-term phase 1 deal can be completed to our satisfaction, where we're absolutely certain that while we're talking with the Iranians, they're not busy advancing their program. We can buy some additional months in terms of their breakout capacity. Let's test how willing they are to actually resolve this diplomatically and peacefully. We will have lost nothing if at the end of the day it turns out that they are not prepared to provide the international community the hard proof and assurances necessary for us to know that they're not pursuing a nuclear weapon. And if that turns out to be the case, then not only is our entire sanctions infrastructure still in place, not only are they still losing money from the fact that they can't sell their oil and get revenue from their oil as easily, even throughout these talks, but other options remain. But what I've said to the members of Congress is that if, in fact, we're serious about trying to resolve this diplomatically, because no matter how good our military is, military options are always messy, are always difficult, always have unintended consequences, and in this situation are never complete in terms of making us certain that they don't then go out and pursue even more vigorously nuclear weapons in the future. If we're serious about pursuing diplomacy, then there's no need for us to add new sanctions on top of the sanctions that are already very effective and that brought them to the table in the first place. Now, if it turns out they can't deliver, they can't come to the table in a serious way and get this issue resolved, the sanctions can be ramped back up, and we've got that option. Roger Runningen. Roger's is his birthday, by the way, so that's not the reason you got a question, but I thought it was important to note that.
Thank
Happy
you,
birthday.
President. Back to health care. Can you guarantee for the American people that the health care website is going to be fully operational for all people, not just the vast majority, by November 30? And second, more broadly, This is your signature domestic piece of legislation.
Right.
You hear criticism on the Hill that you and your White House team are too insular. Is that how this mess came to be?
Well, I think there's going to be a lot of evaluation of how we got to this point, and I assure you that I've been asking a lot of questions about that. The truth is that this is, number one, very complicated. The website itself is doing a lot of stuff. There aren't a lot of websites out there that have to help people compare their possible insurance options, verify income to find out what kind of tax credits they might get, communicate with those insurance companies so that they can purchase, make sure that all of it's verified, right? So there's just a bunch of pieces to it that made it challenging. And you combine that with the fact that the federal government does a lot of things really well. One of the things it does not do well is information technology procurement. This is kind of a systematic problem that we have across the board. And it is not surprising then that there were going to be some problems. Now, I think we have to ask ourselves some hard questions inside the White House as opposed to why we didn't see more of these problems coming earlier on. A, so we could set expectations. B, so that we could look for different ways for people to end up applying. So, ultimately, you're right. This is something that's really important to me, and it's really important to millions of Americans who have been waiting for a really long time to try to get health care because they don't have it. I am very frustrated, but I'm also somebody who, if I fumble the ball, I'm going to wait until I get the next play, and then I'm going to try to run as hard as I can and do right by the team. So, ultimately, I'm the head of this team. We did fumble the ball on it, and what I'm going to do is make sure that we get it fixed. In terms of what happens on November 30th or December 1st, I think it's fair to say that the improvement will be marked and noticeable. The website will work much better on November 30th, December 1st, than it worked certainly on October 1st. That's a pretty low bar. It'll be working a lot better than it was last week, and will be working better than it was this week, which means that the majority of people who go to the website will see a website that is working the way it's supposed to. I think it is not possible for me to guarantee that 100% of the people 100% of the time going on this website will have a perfectly seamless, smooth experience. We're going to have to continue to improve it even after November 30th, December 1st. But the majority of people who use it will be able to see it operate the way it was supposed to. One thing that we've discovered, though, that I think is worth noting, a lot of focus has been on the website and the technology. And that's partly because that's how we initially identified it. These are glitches. What we're discovering is that part of the problem has been technology, hardware and software, and that's being upgraded. But even if we get the hardware and software working exactly the way it's supposed to, with relatively minor glitches, what we're also discovering is that insurance is complicated to buy. And another mistake that we made, I think, was underestimating the difficulties of people purchasing insurance online and shopping for a lot of options.
Without objection.
I ask consent the Senate proceed to executive session to consider calendars number 389, 392, 405, 411, and 421, and all nominations on the Secretary's desk and the Coast Guard. That the nominations be confirmed and blocked. The motion to reconsider be considered made and laid on the table with no intervening action or debate. No further motion be in order to any of the nominations. Any related statement be printed in the record. President Obama will be immediately notified of the Senate's action. The Senate then will resume legislative session.
Without objection.
I ask that the Senate proceed to House Message number S252.
The chair lays before the Senate a message from the House.
Resolved that the bill from the Senate S-252 entitled an act to reduce preterm labor and delivery and the risk of pregnancy-related deaths and complications due to pregnancy and to reduce infant mortality caused by prematurity do pass with amendments.
Is there objection? Without objection.
I ask the Senate concur in the House amendments and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid on the table with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
I unanimous consent the Senate proceed to S-Res 295, 296, 297.
Is there objection to proceeding to the measures en bloc? Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent the resolution be agreed to, preambles be agreed to, the motions to reconsider be laid on the table en bloc with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
I would note the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Note the I would ask, Madam President, the quorum call be rescinded.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to calendar number 245.
The clerk will report.
Calendar number 245, S-Res 292, expressing support for the victims of the typhoon in the Philippines and surrounding regions.
Is there objection to proceeding to the measure? Without objection.
Madam President, I ask that the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid on the table. There be no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
I now ask consent that the Foreign Relations Committee be discharged from further consideration and the Senate proceed to S-Res 284.
The clerk will report.
S-Res 284, calling on the governor of Iran to immediately release Saeed Abedini and all other individuals detained on account of their religious beliefs.
Is there objection? Without objection, the committee is discharged and the Senate will proceed to the measure.
I ask unanimous consent the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, motion to reconsider be considered made and laid on the table.
Without objection.
Now, Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes the business day, it adjourn until 2 p.m. on Monday, November 18th, and that following the prayer and the pledge of morning hour be deemed expired, the adjournment proceedings be approved to date. The time for the two leaders be reserved for use later in the day. Following any leader remarks, Senate be in a period of morning business until 5 p.m. Senators permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each, and that first degree filing deadline for amendments to H.R. 3204 be 3 p.m. on Monday, and second degree amendment filing deadline be 4 p.m. on Monday. Further, that at 5 p.m. the Senate proceed to executive session to consider the nomination of Robert Wilkins to be a United States Circuit Judge for the D.C. Circuit. The time until 5:30, equally divided and controlled in the usual form prior to the cloture vote. And that if cloture is not invoked, the Senate resume legislative session and immediately vote on the motion to invoke cloture on H.R. 3204, the drug compounding bill. And if cloture is invoked on that bill, all post-cloture time be yielded back, pending amendments be withdrawn, and the Senate vote on passage of H.R. 3204. And that upon disposition of 3204, the Senate vote on the motion to invoke cloture on the motion to proceed to S. 1197, the Defense Authorization Act.
Without objection.
So there could be up to 4 roll call votes on Monday at 5:30. There's no further business to come before the Senate. I ask that it adjourn under the previous order.
The Senate stands adjourned until 2 p.m. on Monday.
Work continued in the Senate today on a bill that would subject compounding pharmacies to oversight by the Food and Drug Administration. Compounding pharmacies mix drug ingredients to create medications for individual patients. The bill would create a nationwide system for tracking these drugs. The House passed the legislation in September. President Obama announced today that the administration will allow insurance companies to continue offering insurance plans that do not meet the requirements of the Affordable Care Act. Some people with individual insurance plans had received cancellation notices from their insurance companies. You can see the President's news conference on our companion network C-SPAN tonight at 8 Eastern. And right now, here on C-SPAN 2, a few minutes from the President's announcement.